Chapter 3 Introducing the Honourable Richard Carstares Part 2 of Black Moth by Georgette read for LibriVox.org into the public domain. The pin of my cravat fell out onto my knee. I think no one saw it. As I picked it up, the thought that I should mark the cards seemed to flash into my mind. Oh, it was despicable, I know. I held the ace of clubs in my hand. I scratched at it with that pin in one corner. It was easily done. By degrees I marked all four, and 3 of the kings. No one noticed, but I was nervous. I dared do no more. I replaced that pin. Soon I began to win, not very much. Then Tracy Belmanoir came across the room to watch our play. From that moment everything seemed to go awry. It was the beginning of the trouble. Tracy stood behind me watching. I could feel him there, like some black moth hovering. I don't know how long he stayed like that. It seemed hours. I could feel his eyes. I could have shrieked. I'll swear my hands were trembling. Suddenly he moved. I had played the ace of hearts. He said, "One moment," in that soft, sinister voice of his. Millward was surprised. I tried to tell myself that Devil had noticed nothing. The mark on that card was so faint that I could scarce see it myself. I thought it impossible that he, a mere onlooker, should discover it. He stepped forward. I remember that he brushed my shoulder. I remember how the light caught the diamonds he was wearing. I think my brain was numbed. I could only repeat to myself, "Extravagant devil! Extravagant devil!" and stare at those winking jewels. Then I thought, "He is Lavinia's brother, but I do not like him. I do not like him." Little foolish things like that, and my throat was dry, parched. He bent over the table, stretched out his white, white hand, turned over the ace, lifted his quizzing glass, and stared down at the card. Then he dropped the glass and drew out his snuff-box. It had Aphrodite enamelled on the lid. I remember it so distinctly. I heard Tracy ask Millward to examine the ace. I wanted to spring up and strangle him. I could scarce keep my hands still. Richard paused. He drew his hand across his eyes, shuddering. Millward saw the scratch. He cried out that the cards were marked. Suddenly everyone seemed to be gathered about our table, all talking. Jack had his hand on my shoulder. He and Dare were running through the pack. But all the while I could look at no one but Tracy, Andover. He seemed so sinister, so threatening in those black clothes of his. His eyes were almost shut, his face so white, and he was looking at me. He seemed to be reading my very soul. For an instant I thought he knew. I wanted to shout out that he was wrong. I wanted to shriek to him to take his eyes away. Heaven knows what I should have done. But he looked away at Jack, with that sneering smile on his damned mask of a face. I could have killed him for that smile. I think Jack understood it. He dropped the cards, staring at Tracy. Everyone was watching them. No one looked at me. If they had, they must surely have learnt the truth, but they were hanging on Andover's lips, looking from him to Jack and back again. I remember Fitzgerald dropped his handkerchief. I was absurdly interested in that. I was wondering why I did not pick it up when Andover spoke again. And Carstares's luck turned. Like that, Warburton, with just that faint questioning in his voice. Before Jack could speak there was an outcry. Dare cried, "Shame!" to Andover. They laughed at him as well they might, but I saw them exchange glances. They were wondering. It was suspicious that Jack should have had that run of luck, and that he should lose as soon as he had left that table. Millward, poor silly Millward, gaped at Tracy, and stuttered that surely 'twas another pack we had used. I could hardly breathe. Then Andover corrected him. How did he know? No one else remembered, or thought of noticing, only he. I can see Jack now, standing there so stiffly, with his head thrown up and those blue eyes of his flashing. "Do I understand you to accuse me, Belmanoir?" he said. Oh, but he was furious! Tracy never said a word, only his eyes just flickered to my face and away again. Jack's hand was gripping my shoulder hard. I could feel his anger. Dare called out that the suggestion was preposterous, that John should cheat. Tracy asked him if the cards were his. God, I can hear his soft mocking voice now. Dare went purple. You know his way, Warburton. "Opened in your presence on this table," he cried. "By Carstares," smiled Tracy. It was true. But why should Tracy remember it and none other? They stared at him amazed. Dare turned to Jack for corroboration. He nodded. I think he never looked haughtier. You know how fond of Jack Dare was. He tried to bluster it off, tried to get control over the affair. It was to no avail. We were puppets, worked by that devil Belmanoir. One man managing that ghastly scene. He pointed out that only 3 of us had used that pack, Jack, Millward, and I. Jack laughed. "Next you will accuse Dick," he snapped, scornfully. "One of you, certainly," smiled Andover. "Or Millward." Then everyone realized that one of us 3 must have marked the cards. Millward was upset, but no one suspected him. It was Jack or me. As long as I live I shall never forget the horror of those moments. If I were exposed it would mean the end of everything between Lavinia and me. I tell you, Warburton, I would have committed any sin at that moment. Nothing would have been too black. I could not bear to lose her. You don't know what she meant to me." "I can guess, sir," said the lawyer, gravely. No, no one could imagine the depths of my love for her. I think not even Jack." I felt his hand leave my shoulder. The truth had dawned on him. I heard the way the breath hissed between his teeth as he realized. Somehow I got to my feet, clutching at the table, facing him. I don't excuse myself. I know my conduct was beyond words dastardly. I looked across at him, just said his name, as though I could scarce believe my ears. So all those watching thought. But Jack knew better. He knew I was imploring him to save me. He understood all that I was trying to convey to him. For an instant he stared at me. I thought, God forgive me, I prayed that he might take the blame on himself. Then he smiled. Coward though I was, when I saw that hurt, wistful little smile on his lips, I nearly blurted out the whole truth. Not quite. I suppose I was too mean-spirited for that. Jack bowed to the room and again to Dare. He said, "I owe you an apology, sir." Dare sprang forward, catching him by the shoulder, crying out that it could not be true. When Jack laughed, he fell away from him as from the plague. And all of them. My God! To see them drawing away, not looking at Jack. And Jack's face, growing paler and harder every moment. All his friends, turning their backs to him. Davenant. Even Jim Davenant walked away to the fireplace with Evans. I could not look at Jack. I dared not. I could not go to him, stand by him. I had not the right. I had to leave him there in the middle of the room alone. The awful hurt in his eyes made me writhe. The room was whirling around. I felt sick. I know I fell back into my chair, hiding my face. I hardly cared whether they suspected me or not, but they did not. They knew how great was the love between us, and they were not surprised that I broke down. I heard Andover's voice. He was telling some tale to Dare. Oh, they were well-bred, those men. They skimmed over the unpleasant little episode, ignored Jack. Jack spoke again. I could guess how bravely he was keeping a proud front. I know word for word what he said. "Mr. Dare, your Grace, gentlemen, my apologies for being the cause of so unpleasant an incident. Pray give me leave." They paid no heed. I heard him walk to the door. I heard him open it. I could not look at him. He paused, and said just one word. "Dick," quite softly. Heaven knows how I got to him. I know I overturned my chair. That drew Dare's attention. He said, "You are not going, Dick." I shouted, "Yes," at him, and then Jack took my arm, leading me out. And all he said was, "Poor old Dick." He had no word of blame for me. He would not allow me to go back and tell the truth, as I would have done. I, Warburton, when Jack called me to him, I would have cried it aloud, but he would not have it. He said, "For Lavinia's sake." Warburton blew his nose violently. His fingers were trembling. "You know what happened afterwards. You know how my father turned Jack out penniless. You know his friends shunned him. You know my poor mother's grief. And you know that he went away, that we could not find him when my mother died. His last words to me were, 'Make Lavinia happy, and try to forget all this.' Forget it! Heavens! Try as I might, I could hear nothing further of him until 2 months ago, when he waylaid me. Then I was half dazed at the suddenness of it. He grasped my hand and laughed. It was so dark I could scarce see him. I only had time to demand his address, and then he was off, galloping away over the heath. I think even then he bore me no malice." "He does not now," said Warburton sharply. "But, Master Dick, if all this is true, why do you not even now clear him? Surely—" Richard turned his head slowly. "Now I may not drag my wife's name through the mud. By clearing him, I ruin her." Warburton could find nothing to say. Only after some time did he clear his throat, and say that he was honoured by Carstares's confidence. You dwell on the part played by his Grace on that evening. Surely your, shall we say, overwrought imagination magnified that?" Richard was disinterested. "I suppose so. Mayhap 'twas his extraordinary personality dominating me. He cannot have pulled the wires as I thought he did. Not even Belmanoir could make me act as I did. But at the time I felt that he was pushing, compelling me to accuse Jack. Oh, doubtless I was mad." Warburton eyed the dejected figure compassionately. Then he seemed to harden himself, and to regain some of his lost primness of manner. You are determined not to accept the revenues, sir?" "I have not yet sunk so low, Mr. Warburton." "His lordship leaves Winsham and all appertaining to it at your disposal. He would be grieved at your refusal." "I will not touch it." The lawyer nodded. "I confess, Mr. Carstairs, I am relieved to hear you say that. It will not be necessary again to communicate with his lordship. I think he does not desire any intercourse with his family. He finds it too painful. But he wished to be remembered to you, sir. Also to her ladyship." "Thank you. You could ascertain nothing of his situation? He did not confide in you?" "He was very reticent, sir. I think he is not unhappy." "And not embittered?" "Certainly not that, sir." Mr. Warburton rose, plainly anxious to be gone. Reluctantly Richard followed his example. "You have nothing further to tell me of him?" "I regret, sir, nothing." Richard went slowly to the door and opened it. "You must allow me to thank you, sir, for your goodness in undertaking what I know must have been a painful task. I am very grateful." Mr. Warburton bowed low. "I beg you will not mention it, sir. Nothing I might do for the Carstares could be aught but a pleasure." Again he bowed, and the next instant was gone. Chapter 3